Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about transforming back office accounting today with some automation and analytics. My name is Steve Nebbia. I'm the leader of our outsourced accounting group here at Lutz, and I've been with Lutz for about 9 years.
And I'm Tony DeSantis. I lead our analytics and reporting service offering. I've been at Lutz for a little more than 5 years now, helping clients access their data, understand what's going on with the business, all through reporting and analytics. And we're excited to be here today. We're going to spend the next hour or so with you, hopefully giving you some insight into key accounting processes that are potentials for automation, how to look at them and evaluate what's there within your organization and where the potential lies. We'll talk as well about analytic tools to help navigate financial insight, get information to your hands faster, and then wrap up with an action plan for streamlining those back office operations and really talking through and giving you some areas to think about as you go down this journey or continue down the journey that many of you have probably already started. For those that do need CPE credit, about halfway through, maybe a little farther, we will have a polling question that you'll be able to answer and get credit for that. If you do have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We will take some time and see if we can cover at least some of those. If we don't get to all of you today, we will reach out and answer those questions for you. Also know that we're recording the session. At the end, we will send out that recording as well as the slides that we'll go through today. Quickly, hopefully most of you know a little bit about Lutz. But we are a business solutions firm. It was founded in 1980. We've got offices here in Omaha, Lincoln, and Grand Island with almost 400 employees at this point. We call ourselves a business solutions firm really because as we've identified areas that our clients need assistance in, we look at those services and see how we can help. So while we've got the traditional tax and accounting background, we do M&A work. We have a wealth management group, obviously a tech practice where I sit. We do outsourced accounting, outsourced HR work. So a lot of different services that our clients need and use us in a variety of combinations. So with that, let's get into the heart of what we want to talk to today. And Steve's going to talk through some of the key accounting processes and considerations.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So we're going to start with common accounting challenges that we see businesses or nonprofits running into in their accounting space that are good indicators that maybe it's time to think about some automation or some different tools. We see a lot of manual data entry processes. This is something that's plagued the accounting world since the beginning of time, whether it's expense reports, credit card reimbursements, or it's revenue recognition. There's a lot of manual processes where paper is coming in. We're using paper to determine what should be recorded in the books. And that's how we've been doing it. And that's how we've always been doing it. And so we continue to do those things. I also want to point out in the manual data entry situation, Excel is a good tool to use, but sometimes we can overuse it and it turns into a manual data entry process. Even though we are using some capabilities in Excel, we're taking information from one system, putting it into Excel, and that transposition takes time and is very error prone. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of is a resource constraint issue in the accounting space. There's a lack of qualified accountants out there. It's driving up the price of hiring. It's limiting the number of folks that businesses can have in their accounting staff. So with that, people are being asked to do a little bit more. They're skimping on some stuff that maybe would be higher value if we were able to get to it, just to get the blocking and tackling of the basic accounting done. So we've seen that time and time again over the last 5 years or so. The next thing that I have on our list here is software integration. As all of these new interesting tools come out that have all these AI features and these cool reporting capabilities and allow us to do more with less, we see businesses getting more and more software. And so what used to take 3 softwares or even 1 software now takes 5 to 10. And each one of those pieces does their job very well, but getting them all to talk to each other is an incredibly challenging task, especially for accountants who aren't necessarily tech people and don't necessarily have the background to go through any coding or something like that. So we've seen that a lot, and we kind of have some tools in our chest to deal with that situation, but it can be a big problem for organizations. Last, kind of along those lines, is a limited reporting capability. Again, we see a lot of folks using Excel to do reports, pull information from those different softwares, put it into a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet can do what it needs to do, combine the numbers it needs to combine, and come up with an analysis. There's tools out there that can help with this, but we're definitely seeing reporting becoming more challenging because of the different sources and the leaps and bounds that are being made in reporting exist. They're just not necessarily in the day-to-day accounting software we're seeing.
Yeah, a couple of pieces to highlight. One is the getting stuck in the "this is the way we always did it" routine. We see that time and time again. It's not limited to accounting and back office processes. Throughout the organization, there is this general, well, this is the way we've always done it. And so that's certainly a constraint and a challenge that we see, not unique to accounting. The other, when we go out and talk to clients on analytics, on AI, on reporting, we talk about every organization is becoming a technology company. Whether that's what you do or sell, it is becoming a key component of the organization, how you operate. And really, it's about trying to identify and understand how to use that technology to your advantage to deal with a lot of these challenges. And that's what we're hoping to talk through here today and give you some areas to think about as we progress.
So we want to talk about a couple areas of the accounting processes that are ready for automation, that have tools available out there that can really assist in leveling up our accounting skills and accelerating the time it takes to do some of these manual processes. 2 I'm going to talk about right off the bat: accounts payable and spend management. There are tools out there that allow us to automatically code and pay bills and code and pay expenses that maybe come through via email, come through via, the mail, or other methods that our vendors are using to ping us to say, hey, you need to pay me. There's plenty of tools out there right now that are working great that allow you to pay bills in an efficient, cost-effective manner that will use AI, use some tools to code the bills and dump them into your accounting system automatically so that we aren't doing that process manually. With that, the same thing is true on the credit card side. We all have been victims of the expense reimbursement process where we have to keep all these receipts, remember what we spent, and then at the end of the month, we come up with this manila folder full of files that we take to accounting and say, hey, here's my monthly expenses, can you reimburse it? Well, spoiler alert, the accountants don't like that process, and I'm sure neither do we, the ones submitting the expenses. So there's a lot of really good tools out there now that allow you to either use a credit card that the tool supplies or use your own credit card and automatically code expenses as they happen, automatically capture receipts as you're spending the money, and build in that data, build in that support into the software that then integrates with the accounting software. Super easy to use, and we've seen a lot of success with that. The last thing from an accounting perspective before we get to the reporting that I want to talk about is payroll. We see payroll becoming more and more of a challenge for companies, and there's third-party payroll providers out there who do a great job of handling payroll processing. And then some of them will integrate back to accounting software and allow all of the recording of payroll to happen automatically. that's available out there and it's done pretty well by several vendors. And so we see that as an area of growth in the accounting space in terms of automation. We see that as something where payroll could get more and more automated, and there's already some good options out there in terms of making sure that that's happening automatically. We see it time and time again, clients from multiple departments, clients from multiple locations, trying to get their accounting information to reflect that nuance or that complexity in the data. And it's very challenging for accountants to do that manually. It takes a long time. There's a lot of good payroll software out there that's helping do that automatically. The last thing, and we've already talked about this a little bit, so I don't want to spend too much time because we are going to talk about it again later. The reporting side of things, there's software out there that can help us as accountants do a better job of reporting and produce interactive reports that we can use to drive insights that can help us run the business, help the business owner run the business. And we see that as a space for increased growth and a way to kind of capture those disparate systems and eliminate the problems that are associated with having too many pieces of software.
Yeah, a couple of pieces here. One, and again, as we talk about what action steps may be, but it's good to reiterate as we talk about the tools and software that's out there. Are you using the features and capabilities within your existing systems? Right? We get into that. This is the way we've always done it. But if you've got a more modern system, there's updates and upgrades that are happening that you may be able to take advantage of. And I know when Steve and team are working with clients, sometimes it's just simply turning on a feature like bank feeds that can make all of the difference in some of those processes. So really asking yourself, are we using all of the features that are available to us? The reporting one's an interesting because we talk about analytics and reporting as its separate item, but within the automation umbrella, the automation of reporting has become more and more effective so that you get things more timely. You're not doing those manual copy paste, download, integrate things, and we'll talk more about that. But that automation of some of the key reporting becomes a key component of freeing up space, both mentally as well as in hours that you're needed to do those things. So, keeping those things in mind. The last piece on this slide is Steve talked about payroll and third parties and maybe integrating back into the accounting software. Where we see some clients struggling is that they're trying to use their accounting software for reporting. And so they're shoving more information in there than really is needed for the baseline accounting purposes. And so if you start to take the approach of letting data exist in the systems that are really well versed at handling that. So a payroll system or payroll provider, maybe it's a separate spend management system, the ERP versus time entry. You don't need to get all that shoved into one spot so that you've got easier reporting, because the tools that are out there now are allowing us to bring that data together in a more impactful way. And you're not fighting against that accounting system to have all that information there.
And one other note on what Tony just described in terms of putting too much information in, a lot of times we see that on the revenue side of things too. Whether it's an industry standard CRM or some other custom way of handling revenue or billing, we see a lot of accounting teams focus on getting all of that information into their accounting software. And if you had an alternative way to report out of whatever software your revenue is housed in, maybe you wouldn't have to bring over all that information, and it could save a lot of heartache. Going to talk about a few technology solutions, which we've already touched on a lot of these, but I want to quickly talk about accounting specific solutions that we're seeing out there in the marketplace. There's a big push by Intuit to get folks QuickBooks Desktop onto QuickBooks Online. And we see that as a really good opportunity for people to use some of the new tools that Tony just described, where if you are using the tools associated with QuickBooks Online, the bank feeds, the AI coding, things like that, it will really help accelerate your accounting time and will really help improve your accuracy. That being said, you've got to be on the lookout for the updates. You've got to be willing to try new things, but the cloud-based online systems are going to allow you to do that a lot more than the desktop-based systems. Specific accounting solutions, we've talked about AP and spend management. Those are out there. There's time entry solutions out there. There's payroll solutions out there. If there's a situation you're struggling with from an accounting perspective, if you look online or talk to us, maybe we can help you figure out a software solution that exists for the problem you're running into. The last thing I'm going to talk about here from an accounting specific side of things is some add-ons. Maybe your base package is QuickBooks Online, or maybe you're using Excel a lot. There's options to supplement those pieces of software with little pieces of software that add on to the capabilities. We see stuff that allows you to spread transactions in QuickBooks over time. On the Excel side, QuickBooks has an add-on for Excel that allows you to pull information directly out of QuickBooks into Excel and use that to produce analysis and communicate back to QuickBooks even. So a lot of capabilities in that space. Software is just getting a little bit more integrated, and there's some great options out there. Again, if you're running into a specific problem and want to chat, we can have that conversation and see how we can help. Some other more technical options out there that I'll touch on real quick before we get into reporting here. A lot of softwares have what's called an API that allows two softwares to connect and talk to each other. Again, myself included, accountants aren't necessarily the best at handling APIs and coding and getting the two softwares to connect. That being said, it's an option and it's one to consider when looking at problems, trying to figure out how we're going to improve our efficiency or automation. Figuring out if two softwares can talk through an API is a good place to consider, looking into to improve our efficiency. Next, robotic process automation. This is a tool that's been out there for a few years. I think it's kind of like a little brother to AI, maybe. But we've used this tool called Power Automate that Microsoft has come up with to automate some of our processes here, where we're producing, recurring filings, or we're producing very similar types of documents over and over and over again. Well, we build in a tool that takes goes step by step through a process and automates that process on the computer. Artificial intelligence is all the rage nowadays. Everybody's talking about it, and we're using it too here. We think it's definitely going to be a huge player over the long term for accounting and in general. If you're not using Copilot, ChatGPT, something like that, I would highly recommend getting started with that. There's a million different ways to use AI, and I think people are just starting to scratch the surface here. A lot of the tools that we're talking about have AI built in to a certain extent as well, which can help. Last thing, Power BI, Tableau, and Alteryx. Those are all reporting softwares that allow you to take that data, aggregate it from different sources, and then report in one clean, unified package. So that's kind of some options out there from a software perspective. Next up would be, or did you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight a couple more things on here. We could spend, a full hour session on all of these individually and talking through them. Being in the technology space myself, I think the best thing about AI has been the creativity and the questions that have started to come out of different departments, different areas, and folks really trying to go, hey, how do I use AI to do this? And a lot of times the conversations we're having is the questions are great, but AI isn't the solution. It's automation or reporting that that can be done, but it has opened us up to thinking about solving problems in a different way. And so don't get lost or scared in the technology aspect. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but looking at processes and trying to understand or thinking to yourself, there's got to be a better way. That's an opportunity to have a discussion about what technology makes sense in order to look at there being another way. It's not about eliminating the knowledge, the experience, those skill sets, but how do we take off the formatting issues, right? Are you getting information in a PDF file and then you've got to try and copy it out? It never copies as a table like you want to, and then you're spending time formatting it in Excel. Well, with AI tools, you can have AI do that for you really quickly and really simply. And that's something day to day I use. As you're thinking about where could I use this, using ChatGPT to brainstorm. Here's what our process looks like in general. Where are there opportunities to apply automation? So thinking about using especially AI as a tool to brainstorm and think of answers can help you get around maybe some of the technical limitations you may feel that you have. So don't be scared by it. I think embracing it and utilizing it is key. With that, the last bullet on here is Power BI, Tableau, Alteryx. These are business intelligence related tools that allow data to be brought in together. And so we can talk a little bit more about analytics and reporting. Inevitably, when I'm getting involved with clients, and you yourselves have probably experienced one or many of these challenges, right? Steve alluded to it in terms of we've got a lot of different softwares doing a lot of different things. They don't talk to each other. I've got to download data from these systems, try and blend it together. By the time I get it done, I'm just happy to be done with it and get it off my plate. So I'm not really analyzing or looking at the information. Or because we've got all of these processes, the data's a mess. We don't have it all in one place. I can't get it timely. I'd like to have it daily, but it's all I can do to get it once a month or once a quarter. So we're having those conversations and evaluating how do we help bridge that gap? Where can we solve that problem? And a lot of times it takes the form of automating that reporting process. And so as we approach this with our clients, and as you think about it, there's an evolution to implementing analytics, right? Everybody wants the big red easy button for those that remember the Staples commercials, right? I just want to hit that button or have that dashboard and it gives me all my answers. And even with AI, that's not the reality of it. There may be data quality issues. There may just be simple things that you need visibility into so that you can ask the next set of questions. And so we'll come in, we will discuss how do we recreate those manual reporting processes and automate them. Our tool of choice right now is Power BI, but that can be done even through Excel and some of the features that Stephen talked about, where you can create automatic data feeds or just the ability to hit a refresh button in Excel and have information from multiple systems combined together and served up to you. So how do you look at just getting data access and blending automated and effective? Once we've kind of established that baseline, now we're looking at, are there areas that we don't have visibility into? We'd love to see AR on a more regular basis, or how the days of cash on hand without having to go log into the bank statement, see where we're at, and recording that in an Excel file. What are the trends over time, right? We're so focused on the month-end report. Maybe we've got a spreadsheet that now has 32 columns of data because we've captured every month and we just have to add to it. And we don't have anything visual, but we're looking at rows and columns of data. So how do we start to think about that, those areas that we'd love to have, we just have never had time to do that? The other piece is context. where are we versus budget, last year, last period, so that we've got some frame of reference to go, is that number good or bad? Is that trend something that's meaningful or impactful, right? Would we expect it to be trending up because we've got a cyclical business and we're in the right spot? Are they trending together, right? If revenue and costs are going up, our margins, should kind of stay in line, but are we keeping our gross margin in the same fluctuation, or is it going the wrong way? So really thinking about then, what don't I have access to? What do I want visibility into? And starting to think about that next wave of reporting leads us to what we call reimagining that existing reporting. So a lot of times, and for many accountants, that spreadsheet, rows and columns of data information makes sense. I will say most people don't see rows and columns of data very easily and understand exactly what they're seeing. So, especially as you think of leveraging maybe younger, less experienced staff or some knowledge transfer pieces, how do we start to create visualizations of that data so that trends become more obvious? The exceptions jump out. In that reimagined stage, we talk about exception reporting. And how do we get to the action items without somebody having to drag their finger down the screen and look for that outlier? So a lot of times as we're having conversations, we may execute the report, but our questions are, what are you doing with this? Why do you need it? Why is it important? What are you looking for? I've got examples here internally where some of my fellow shareholders want 100-column spreadsheet with 10,000 rows of data in them. And my question is always, what are you looking for? Let me serve up those exceptions first. You can address those. We're not going to hide the detail, but rather than starting with that detail, let's start at the insight and information that might be valuable. And then the last piece in the evolution is, what are those new insights? What are the things that we haven't thought about, or that, from a human eye perspective, we just simply can't find? And so can we start applying advanced analytics? Maybe that's customer segmentation. Maybe that's more sophisticated forecasting. We take the frame of trying to balance the effort and the precision necessary to what we're trying to do. And these don't need to be really complex tool sets, but something that allows you to understand the data faster, quicker, and tell you things maybe you didn't already know. Do that there, Stu?
No, I think that's great.
So what we wanted to do now is just give you some examples of where this can go visually to get your minds thinking about, do we have these things? How might they be useful? And can we look at information in a slightly different way? We're going to change screens here. So this first set of demonstrations is kind of on that reimagine scale, right? We've recreated some basic reporting, but we've really gone to reimagining how that's presented and provided from a baseline standpoint. And we can get into the nuances of Power BI and how it works and features. We try to make it feel like an app, make it easy to navigate and look through pieces of information. But this is more about the content and giving you ideas of what makes sense. So what are the key metrics for your business that on a day-to-day basis, maybe an hourly basis, knowing where you stand are important, and thinking about how do we summarize that and give that information? And so you see some of our basics here around revenue, cost of goods sold, labor. What do our overhead expenses look like? And so where's that put us from a net income perspective? And then what's that change? Where does that land at the end of the day?
And I think the change or the comparative is really here. A lot of what we focus on is our performance versus some sort of benchmark, whether that's the prior period, prior year, a budget that we've set for ourselves, we want to be looking at our performance against some measure that's going to tell us how we're doing, whether or not we're improving. And if we're not doing that and we're just looking at, hey, are we making enough, or are we, even with enough, there's some sort of benchmark there. Are we making money or not? Is not a good enough standard to hold ourselves to. It should be, what metric do we think we should be measuring ourselves against, and how are we doing against that metric? And this does a good job of showing trends over time, where you quickly compare how we're doing versus prior periods or compared to prior year. And then there's even this percentage of revenue to see, okay, well, how are we holding ourselves accountable from a expense side of things to, the ratio between our expenses and our revenue.
And the important thing here is many of you are probably looking and going, yeah, we've got this chart, but I only do it quarterly or monthly, but it takes me the whole last week of the month or the first week of the next month to get it. With tools like Power BI, we've structured this so we've got a daily, hourly, whatever cadence feed of the data, and from multiple sources, so that we've got this information at hand on a regular basis. So once it's built, now it's there, and we're not reliant on somebody filling out a spreadsheet or downloading information. And, heaven forbid you want to take a vacation, right? And it's around month end. These things are available and now syncing automatically to be able to be looked at. We can also interact with it. We can have that information, and different ways to look at it. So this is kind of that overall view, but there's features and functionality like being able to select different years, and looking at that and have it quickly change and show us that information. And so rather than pulling out your last year's packet and trying to compare against a couple of PDF files, you've got that information at hand available, and you can start interacting with it. Other areas, right? We can look at vendor information and vendor expenses. And so here, again, simple summary by vendors ranked in order, so that visually you can kind of just say, okay, does that make sense? Is that in line with what we were expecting? We've also got a little bit more of a comparative of what's the change, so year over year, how much difference is there? And what is my total spend? So I can start prioritizing areas to look at, right? And immediately, just without knowing anything about what business we're looking at, what type of issues might exist, you've got a vendor up here that's high spend, high change. Now we've got features, I can look over it. Okay, it's a new vendor to the system, right? So do we know what they're doing, why they're doing it? Is it an expected behavior?
And if you click on that too, you can see, okay, well, when did we spend it? Okay, great. We had one expense for 56 grand with this vendor. It's not something that's trickling in over time. It should be pretty clear what that was for and how it's being spent. Whereas if you click on one of these other ones, you might see that, okay, well, this vendor, for example, we paid in period 14 or at the end of the year last year and at the beginning of the year this year. Does that really make sense? And asking those kind of questions that help us figure out, are we getting what we expect from our vendors, and are we, paying things that we should be paying?
Some other features, again, this isn't a Power BI demonstration necessarily, but the ability to switch that view, right? For those that the tabular format makes more sense, you can quickly toggle between a visual and that table view. Here, again, we've got it by vendor, but maybe you want to be looking at it by classes or some other dimension of that data, way to slice and dice it, to be able to quickly shift those views and go, okay, location 3 is our highest spend. What are those vendors that are associated? And without a bunch of filtering, I can interact with that visual and take a look at it.
And this is a comparative page. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where there's always got to be something we're holding ourselves to. This is going to compare us to the prior year. And you can see in the difference column, there's conditional formatting that calls our attention to the large changes. Well, in one of these, we've got different classifications, and that's a different topic where there's, got to be consistency year over year to make these work. And sometimes reports like this highlight that inconsistency and help us figure out how to make our data better.
Yeah, and with these tools, a lot of times we see companies struggling with, well, the system doesn't let me capture information this way, but I'd really like to categorize it or report it in this manner. Tools like this can help bridge that gap. The other thing I see, what I call hijacking fields. There's a field in the system that we don't use for its intended purpose. So we've kind of hijacked it to, make it be this categorization field or element. You can eliminate some of that need and, creating some complexity within the system by taking it to the reporting layers and create those groupings that may be more beneficial. The last piece on this, again, is just to highlight getting things into one place as well. So I don't need to go to a bunch of different files or have this massive Excel file that's got 50 tabs and you need an engineering degree to understand what's happening. I can bring a lot of information together. So this is a basic kind of P&L view of what you have. Again, with some filtering, I can choose and get down to single locations, right? So I can look at the view by one location, both locations, and do that quickly. So even if you've got a system that doesn't necessarily let you consolidate multiple areas or multiple P&Ls, you can bring those together in a reporting tool like this. You can also kind of summarize up. You see some of these are collapsed, and then we can drill down into those details to kind of keep it clean, focus in on the areas that you want to look at and explore further.
So we might have a few questions in the chat.
Okay. I'm going to hit the next one, then we're going to actually hit a polling question. And while we're doing that polling question, we'll look at those questions for you. So this is just to give you a slightly different example as getting into more advanced ways to look at it. So here we're actually creating risk scores on transactions based on different testing. And you can see the different types of tests, those that maybe have done some internal audit work or other background, these may look familiar, but evaluating transactions. Are they round dollars? Are there suspicious keywords in there? Are they complex structures to the debit and credit flow of the data, and starting to get into that a little bit more, applying some level of risk based on those, and then segmenting out those transactions that we want to look at further. This isn't going to be necessary for everybody. There's ways to keep it simple, but being able to score transactions, look at them and go, okay, I want to just focus in on my high risks. So when we talk about those action items, what are those? Where's their score? Now I can start to focus high risk, high total dollars and start to understand what's happening, and can kind of click in there, see the transactions that failed and understand what's happening. Can also, again, explore more deeply. We can spend hours on just this type of thing, but wanted to give you that example of how do we look a little bit deeper into analysis, but continuing to drill down. I can get to a transaction. I can see all of the failures that they had, all of the details of that transaction. Again, getting into more information. Okay, so with that, I'm going to try and jump back here, get into our presentation, move on to our polling question that's going to get launched, and then we'll take a look at some questions here while we give everybody a few minutes. Question here about corporate cards. Coding is manual. They're using QuickBooks Enterprise. What options exist to simplify the process?
So there's some tools out there that allow you to, like I said, use either a credit card that is associated with the software or your own credit card to code expenses through an app. A couple that we've seen are Bill Spend and Expense and Ramp. Those are two that are popular out there. And there was a comment in there about not recommending QuickBooks Online. I'll just address that. For various reasons, some people might be better off with different softwares. We like QuickBooks Online and feel like it's made a lot of progress. But if you're somebody who's using QuickBooks Enterprise, you might have a large organization that maybe isn't suited for QuickBooks Online. So it's important to get the software that works for your situation.
Question here about what's the best way to get started creating reports in Power BI. We have it in our ERP provider. We have it and our ERP provider has some canned reports, but how do we get more knowledgeable in creating reports and dashboards like the ones you're showing? There is a ton of content out on the web. Two guys in a cube are Microsoft folks that do a really nice job of exploring different areas of Power BI. Depending on that ERP provider, you may have access to the what's called the PBIX files that they're using. Getting in there and looking at the design and what's happening can also be a way to get started. Microsoft's got some great tools in terms of if you look at some of their data analytics certification courses, you don't need to actually take the certification, but you can use that for learning and knowledge development as well. And then there's also options to reach out to providers like ourselves where we can help kind of navigate some of those questions and or supplement the skill sets based on what we do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here at the end, but a lot of great resources out there on the web. There was a question, does this pull from disparate data sources, example, QBO, ERP, etc.? I'm assuming that's referring to the dashboards we were showing. Yes, it does. That's the beauty and the strength of these tools, whether it's Power BI or Tableau. ClickView is another one that's out there on the market, is that ability to bring data from different sources, blend them together. Now, you need some way to link them. And sometimes that the first hurdle is saying, what is that connectivity and creating the data infrastructure to be able to do that.
The QuickBooks Online versus NetSuite or Sage Intacct question. We've seen all three of them. NetSuite and Intacct tend to be a little bit more expensive and higher horsepower, so to speak. That being said, you got to really ask yourself why you're going that route. If it's a reporting issue, maybe there's a different way to solve it where you're not spending a lot on an accounting system, or you're not getting yourself into something that's more complicated than it needs to be. If you're looking for a lot of integrations amongst different ERP functions, those are good products. Sometimes Intacct's a good product because it has the ability to add a bunch of different dimensions to data, which can be useful. But again, it just kind of depends on the use case that you're talking about.
Good. Address the AP, the HIPAA compliant one.
The HIPAA compliant, yeah, there are AP and expense management that are HIPAA compliant. I'm not the right person to discuss that, but we've got folks that use the same tools with, HIPAA, with medical providers who have HIPAA concerns.
And we can take that question away and get back to you specifically on that. The question about, is our audit department going to use, I'm assuming it was reference to that last report we showed that was really where some of that came from. We've evaluated for some of the things we do from an audit perspective, some other tools that are on the market in order to do that. So there's a blending of that risk approach to transaction testing that's certainly been baked in. There are some audit standards and other things that are changing as well that team's working through. All great questions. Keep them coming. If there's other things out there that you've got questions about, even if we don't get it today, we can follow up. So we'll take the last 15 minutes here or so and walk through action plans and next steps.
So we've talked a lot about different softwares, different reporting tools, and you might be asking yourself, well, I just don't know where to start. The way that we would tackle this situation is identify the bottlenecks or problem areas. What takes the team a long time? What holds up financials? What creates data issues? Those are the situations that we would focus on. And you can say, oh, well, I know that this process takes a long time. Let's just go automate it. But I think we would say pause and think about the process you have in place today. Because what we don't want to do, and we've made this mistake ourselves, you don't want to automate a bad process because it doesn't work very well and you don't get as much out of that automation. And so it's really important when we're going through this, when we do this with our own processes, map your process out in detailed steps so that you can see what each step is intended to take and how the process flows from one person to the next, or back and forth. And that back and forth can be very, time consuming sometimes. And that's a big thing that you can see by mapping this out is where are we spending time? What are the steps that we're taking that we don't need to be taking? And that gets us to that step 3, which is rethinking that process. Rearranging the steps, cutting steps that are unnecessary, getting to a point where your process to get from, okay, I got raw data and I need to get to a clean, summarized version of that to put into my accounting system. Well, if you map out how you get from one spot to the next, you can figure out, okay, well, I can make this more efficient by just doing, these 3 things all together instead of doing them one piece at a time over, a sequence of steps. And that will allow you to get to a more streamlined solution, a more streamlined process that you can then work on automating, and it'll be a lot easier for you to automate and it'll work a lot better because it's more efficient. The last thing, which may be the hardest part of this whole thing that we've talked about, everything that we've talked about today, this might be the hardest thing, is implementing the change management, very challenging. Clear communication and reasonable expectations are the best tools when you're implementing change and dealing with change management. A lot of people have a reluctance to turn over things to software or to let go of processes that they're very comfortable with. And this is a scary time for accountants that are used to doing things a certain way. And now we have all these tools doing our job and we're not sure if they're doing the job right and we're not sure if we can trust them. Well, being clear about communications, setting reasonable expectations, and making sure that everybody's got buy-in in terms of the process and the change, really important part of this whole process.
Yeah, say Steve stole my line about not automating bad process. I talk to the team about that all the time. I want to be clear though, that bad process isn't necessarily because somebody's, ill intent. A lot of times there are reasons why that process existed the way it does now because of limitations and constraints you had at the time of creating that process. And it hasn't evolved with the tools and other things. And so, as Stephen talked about, rearranging steps, taking things out, I always like to look at it from where are we starting and where do we need to end first? And then we can figure out what's the shortest path there that makes sense. The automating that process that's in its current form may feel more cumbersome to try and automate. Even if you could automate all those steps, there may be a lot of work to doing that isn't necessary if you take that step back and go, okay, how can I get from point A to point B as fast as possible without having to go through the 10 steps that we originally did? The change management piece of this, showing wins and how it's going to free up time from the things folks don't like doing, is where you can start to get that buy-in and value to the rest of the team going, yeah, this is a good thing for us. This is about enhancing the experience for yourselves and your employees and taking some of those manual things that drive people nuts off of your plate, and then looking to how do we think about the business and explore it and do different things that are impactful and valuable than maybe the stuff we've gotten stuck in doing as we move forward. So I heard years ago, instead of artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence. So we're letting the computers do things they're really good at, so we can spend time doing the things we're really good at. And if you think about it and approach it that way, there's a lot of benefit that can be had. I think we've talked a lot about these things as we've explored the last 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, but that change management, employee resistance is a real, and as Stephen pointed out, probably the toughest thing. We can figure out the technology, you can get somebody to get you there, but you need the team and the organization to see that value. And so having a clear plan, addressing it early, here's the benefit to you, and how we're looking to leverage these things is important. As a data guy, I've seen whether it's the Power BI, data visualization tools of the world, or AI, or all these things that the marketing spin on them makes it sound like it is that big red easy button. Just plug it in and it will work. That is not the reality. Data is a challenge. It needs to be clean. It needs to be understood. But we can't let perfection get in the way of progress. And I know that may be a scary idea for the accountants on this call. And there are absolutely areas where that data has to be exact. But starting small, starting to work through the experiments to get that data clean or understood or organized in a way that makes sense is important. On the reporting side, somebody asked the question about how do we get started on Power BI, self-learning some of those things. There are mistakes that get made just inevitably. And when I talk to our clients, it's like, we've screwed up so you don't have to. We've learned a lot of those lessons. Getting data in the report itself cleaned and ready to go is great. But if you've done a bunch of things to get revenue to work and it is only in that one report, when somebody else goes to write another report and is trying to get revenue numbers, you may have different numbers. And so thinking about how do we centralize that clean, good data that maybe has been transformed in a couple of ways to get a revenue number we all know is right, is the number we want to see, so that as we build reporting and other things that is consistent, is an important part of the process. That legacy software, we've grown, we've acquired companies. We started this ERP 20 years ago. It hasn't progressed, but we're stuck doing it because we're all fearful, and rightfully so, of changing ERPs. How do we get through that and look at that? That API connection Stephen talked about, that may not exist, but are there reports that can automatically be sent to an email, or that we can download automatically through that RPA or automation processes to get that data in a more systematic, automatic way, are ways we can get through that legacy software issue and limitation. Not all of them are solvable, and sometimes it may come down to a decision of, do we change in order to get better visibility or not? And then ultimately resource constraints, whether they're monetary or just physical bodies. How do we do this? I think it's a collaboration at the end of the day of your technical resources and the accounting team. You all know what needs to get done. You may not be able to execute it. More and more kids coming out of school have that blend of accounting and technical background, so you may be able to take advantage of that. But where this doesn't work is, if we've seen, is IT pushing you and saying, hey, look at this accounting report we created without your input, right? They don't know the nuances of the business needs and why you need stuff. So really creating that partnership is important. And then ultimately, it may be a third party that makes sense in utilizing, at the very least, to jumpstart the program. But there are options in providing that more as an outsourced resource that you can use.
I think a big thing is accounting teams that are looking to automate and then looking to improve their processes are usually overwhelmed. And so asking them to implement change on top of what they're already doing and is already an overwhelming amount of work, very challenging. So that is something that, of those roadblocks we covered, I think gets in a lot of people's way, is we're doing so much already. We don't have time to change. And we've seen that time and time again.
Yep.
We're going to talk a little bit about getting some third-party help, and we're going to do this in context of our two offerings here. I want to point out the note at the bottom of this slide, because I think this is really, in terms of delivering the message that we're trying to deliver here today, there's a lot of people out there that can help with implementing these changes, getting the software set up. What we think is really valuable if you're going to go with a third-party provider is simplicity and straightforward communication. That being said, talk a little bit about outsourced accounting, then I'll turn it over to Tony. Full outsourced accounting options from accountant all the way through CFO are available. There's a lot of people out in the marketplace doing this. We are doing this where we're coming in, handling transactional accounting, handling producing financial statements, using some of those reports that you guys saw today to deliver insights and coach and help work with the business to use their financial information to help with strategic initiatives. The benefit of doing that, you get a slice of a bunch of different time from different people. We've got different skill sets. Everybody's got different skill sets. And so if you get one person that you hire, you're limited by their skill set. I'm not good at certain things that members of my team are really good at. They're not good at things that I'm good at. We kind of play our position, contribute parts of our skills to the project, and allow our clients to get a little slice of each of our skills. The last thing I'm going to mention here, which is not necessarily a full outsourced option, but it fits very well with what we've talked about today. We can do an accounting procedures assessment where we come in and do a deep dive into what you're doing from an accounting perspective, analyze every aspect of it, produce a detailed report on what we have experienced and what our recommendations are. That would be another option for folks who are looking for third-party help.
Yeah, and similarly, we offer that kind of outsourced model with analytics and reporting. And so the right skill set at the right time and those slices that Stephen talked about is the same thing. We believe that to do the analytics and reporting well, there's a lot of different skill sets, from connecting to that data or automating those data pools to designing a report that's impactful, that asks and answers the right questions, is easy to use, and then the development over time, and kind of meeting you where you are and where you want to go. And so without the need to hire one individual with a set of skills that may be just not able to handle everything the organization needs, we can do that scale up and scale down as needed, so that you've got essentially access to an entire analytics team without having to build that yourself. So some options. Again, there's others in the market that will do similar things. To Steve's point, simplicity, straightforward communication. You can start small, build and develop and grow over time. You're not looking to solve all of this at one time. So I know a couple more questions came in. Unfortunately, we're up on time, but and want to be respectful for that. We can reach out to those individuals that we haven't covered off yet. If there are additional questions, shoot them in the chat. Like I said, we'll get back to those individuals. slides will come out later today. We appreciate you attending. And if you've got any questions that come up later, feel free to reach out. We're happy to have conversations and help navigate and provide additional details.
And thanks for spending your lunch hour with us.